where he is. He's going to end up going somewhere else just because free agency. And it's going to be the same way in college football. Like if I don't like my coach, I just leave, which I don't know. There's goodness and badness to that, but
the coaches, the most interesting thing about the article was that these players now have agents in college.
Yeah.
And so these coaches have gotten used to this paradigm where they can just tell these players anything. And once they're on campus, it's too late. And that's very much not the paradigm anymore. And the coaches or the agents straight up said these coaches are their worst enemies, their own worst enemies. They promise these kids all this stuff, and then that's not the way it plays out. And then the kids want to leave, and the coaches are like, why do you want to leave?
Yeah. Well,
I wonder.
As obvious, but you can also see the impact of the NIL, like the booster clubs, like
for sure.
Look at Coastal Carolina, man. Their whole team left after the Chanticleers, whatever the Crystal Blackers or whatever the name of the group was. There was a group of guys that was throwing money into an NIL pool, and then as soon as those guys left, everybody popped smoke. And so,
we've started picking up some dudes. So whenever you're ready, here, Rob.
All right, so. If you haven't heard the news, Army joined the American Athletic Conference, and in the lead up of the 2024, yeah, it's very, very breaking about 6 months ago. But if you haven't heard, one of the things that we're going to try to do is we're going to try and get some of the folks that are going to be opponents in the future and other people that are covering down on their respective teams onto the Ask for Football show. So welcome back, Trash Talkers, to the College Football Roundtable, or if you like, you can call it Ring Knocker Radio. I'm your host, Rob, in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We've got Dano Ikebesa in coastal Connecticut. Ryan, we will introduce you fully when we get to your portion of the show. But how are you guys doing today?
Oh, never better. Like I said, we got to talk just a minute. This is a football show, and it's about Temple football, no less. But we got to talk for at least a few minutes about that baseball game, because that baseball series with Bucknell was one of the most compelling sports things I have ever seen. And we put the new sports bar on the back deck together on Saturday. That took 6 hours. So I was out there listening to it while I was, putting in 500 screws to put that stupid thing together, and it was just unbelievable. And then I couldn't even watch yesterday. Every time I turned it on, Bucknell would score 3 runs. Every time I turned it off, Army would score 5. Madness. Yeah. Freaking madness.
It literally was like the come from behind victory. It's almost like if you could have staged it like a movie, that would have been it. I mean, like I was seriously concerned that Navy was going to end up in the driver's seat for the Patriot League championship. But now it looks like all roads lead through Army. And it should be a good game, but like, holy smokes, man. Like, I've never seen like 2 come from behind victories back to back in a series like that.
So on Saturday, I promise I'll shut up about this after this, but on Saturday, Bucknell's starting pitcher went 9 innings through 140 pitches. And they kept him in there even in the 8th and the 9th inning when Army started knocking the kid around a little bit. And, he's like, he wasn't losing control of the zone, but he wasn't striking dudes out. They were getting hits. It was only a 4-run game. Army scored 3 and had men on second and third with 1 out on Saturday with a chance to win in the bottom of the 9th. And they just, they just couldn't get it done. But after watching this series, the last 2, yesterday, the 2 games, like, it's obvious why they left that kid in there for 140 pitches, because when they went to the bullpen, they got shelled. So, yeah,
that's fair. So introducing Ryan. Ryan, tell us where you're from. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So my name's Ryan Wallen. I've been covering Temple football and athletics since I was a sophomore at Temple. So this will be, I believe, my 8th full year covering the team.
Awesome.
I am from originally New Oxford, Pennsylvania, which is about 10 minutes outside of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So you history people out there, obviously, you'll have at least a bit of an idea of where I am. I went to Temple in 2014 as a journalism major, ended up double majoring in journalism and history, and graduated from Temple in 2018. And I write for owlsdaily.com now, which is the 247 sports affiliate for Temple. And I've covered with them since I started as a sophomore, like I mentioned earlier. At the time, the site was called Owls 247, which now is actually the FAU 247 site.
Interesting.
When 247 bought Scout, they had merged the 247 and Scout site. So we just took on the Scout name, which was owlsdaily.com. So basically my boss, Sean Pastor, who is a great Twitter follow, he's a Temple athletics guru on Twitter at Temple Owls Daily. Give him a follow if you're more interested in Temple. He allowed me to stay on and write for him, and I've been doing so ever since.
So is this your career, or are your journalism for a bunch of other places? Or, I mean, I can't imagine 24/7 is paying your mortgage, but maybe they are, because I have no idea.
Yeah, no, I am currently a building substitute at the district where I went through high school, and hoping to land a full-time teaching job here in the coming weeks.
Awesome, man. Congratulations. Good luck.
Appreciate it.
That's awesome. And speaking of covering the team, we have a Patreon here at As for Football. So if you like As for Football and want to support coverage of Army sports and American Conference football, so you get guests like Ryan on the show, you can support us through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/As for Football to learn more. There are some links on the website. At the yearling level, you get weekly games and locks. At the Cal level, you get that plus our scouting report. And at the Firsty level, you get access to our exclusive private Facebook group called the Firsty Club for our top level patrons. This is the best place to talk about Army sports and college football in general, because we're all super fans. We try really hard to keep it positive, and it's a private group, so what happens there stays there. Firsties also get access to live recordings like this one, so you can interact with us throughout the show. You drop your comments in the chat, and then we will read them live as we're producing the show. We spent a lot of money over the past year to improve the show. We're now on StreamYard. We're using Podcastful AI to improve sound quality, and we have regular recording time so folks can join us live. All that stuff takes time and money. That's why we need your support. The other reason why the show is now open for YouTube and Twitter, it's your free preview to see if you like the content at As for Football, so you want to join us and follow through the 2024 season. We do have a new sponsor coming up, but we'll announce that in a couple weeks. But other than that, we'll dive into this week's topic. So, Dano, back over to you.
Yeah. So, well, we got into your background and your major and stuff. Usually we spend a little time with the West Pointers that we have on, going through the class and stuff. You, I think, might be the first non-Army related, non-grad of any kind, not even a Navy grad on the show. So congratulations on that, for whatever that's worth.
I'm honored. I feel honored.
So last year Temple finished 3-9, 1-7 in the AAC. And let me tell you before we get started, I don't want to beat you up. But as I was putting this together, like, y'all got some questions on the team that we want to talk about. So don't feel like I'm beating you up, but you finished 13th out of 14 teams in the conference. Notable wins: Akron, pretty good win; Norfolk State, beat Navy. So all right, that's cool. But man, the season seemed kind of like feast or famine in general. Your only close loss came against USF at the tail end of the season. Obviously 3-9 is not where you want to be, but like, tell us, how'd you feel about this season? Like, were there good parts? What are we missing here?
I think the biggest thing that I was hoping to see last season was that next step. I wanted to see that development from the year prior, especially since Temple finished off the 2021 or 2022 season with a couple of really close, hard-fought losses down the stretch to Houston and East Carolina. They were in shootout mode, and they just couldn't get it done at the end of the day. One more play maybe makes the difference in each of those games. And Temple is sitting at 5-7 in Stan Drayton's first year, and you're thinking, this is not bad. And you have a young quarterback in EJ Warner who showed a lot of promise and potential when in that first year. And then you go into next year and you're like, well, as long as you made some improvements, you patched some holes where you felt that the areas were weak, specifically along the lines and in the trenches, those spots were really struggles in 2022 for Temple. And, they thought they did that, but then you come out last season, you have a close game against Akron. You struggled at times with Norfolk State in the first half, but then eventually pulled away. And then you just, have a very poor performance in conference, especially with the new conference members, where, the Cincinnati's, the UCFs, the Houston's left the conference, you think, this is on paper a weaker conference than what you had been playing in. You think you could maybe be a little more competitive in that conference with the new conference members coming in, and that just wasn't the case. And Temple had a lot of injury issues last year, and I know every team has injury issues. That's not really an excuse for them, but I never had seen a team have so many key injury issues at various points throughout the season. It was like one position group could get healthy, and then they're down 3 defensive linemen the next week. And it was just constant like that all season, and they never really got it figured out. And I think that was a large part of why they struggled so much. EJ, I wouldn't say he regressed, but he didn't develop in the ways that he hoped he would. I guess just in the sense of decision making, and he just didn't kind of take that next step that you were hoping for earlier on against some of those weaker opponents that maybe you thought you could have picked up a win or two against. And that kind of just led to a very similar result as to Stan Drayton's first year, where they finished 3-9 and, towards the bottom of the conference.
I got to say, I was impressed with EJ because I thought he did a lot without a lot of supporting cast. Granted, the games that I watched were probably, obviously you beat Navy. I watched that game. I watched the USF game because I'm actually from Tampa, Florida, went to high school down there. So I hesitate to say that I root for the Bulls, but I do follow them. And especially when, we weren't even in the conference. That was one of the American teams that I followed a little bit closer. So I thought y'all played well, but it's asking a quarterback a lot to do, no running game, defense struggling to stop people, and so now he's got to get in a shootout every time. I mean, that's a tough ask to me. So I don't know, for whatever that's worth. I don't know if that's a question, but would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I thought that, especially his freshman year in 2022, I thought he did a phenomenal job given the circumstances of he had basically a different starting offensive line in front of him every week.
Yeah.
And that continued even into last season. And I think it's some crazy statistic that I think out of the last 24 games, Temple's had 22 different starting offensive line combinations.
Wow.
And only one pair of weeks is when they were consecutive. So it's a crazy, crazy statistic for the last 2 seasons for Temple. And that's just due to injuries, guys just not meeting the standard that Temple was hoping for.
Yeah.
Along the line. And I think as a freshman, he did, like I said, a phenomenal job, because he only was sacked 10 times during his freshman year. And that was one of the fewest in the country that year. And, he was very good at just getting the ball out quick, doing what Temple needed him to do to actually put them in a position to win games. Last year, like I said, I think at times he kind of got hit a little bit more than what he had as a freshman. The sack numbers weren't as bad, like they were a little worse, but he was getting hit more. And I think that was causing him to get a little hesitant and try to do a little too much at times. And that led to some of the mistakes that he was making. But I still can't necessarily put that all on EJ, because at the end of the day, there's other guys out there. Football's a team sport. There's 11 guys on the field. They have to go out and work as a unit cohesively to make plays. You can't put it on, a 19-year-old kid, regardless of the pedigree he comes from. He's still a 19-year-old kid. He's going to make mistakes. You have to support him in that. And I don't know if they did a great job of that last year.
So obviously now EJ has gone to Rice. I seem to be the only person in the world that thinks that that's a massive upgrade for the Owls. But that's fine. I'll be on the island there. But what's the future of Temple's offense? Apparently you got a Rutgers transfer, Evan Simon, and a redshirt junior, Forrest Brock. Like, how are we feeling about this?
I think that coming into the spring, Temple fans were hoping Evan Simon was going to be the guy, because obviously he had played at a Power 5 school and Rutgers in the Big Ten, which arguably, a top 2 conference in college football. and he had won the starting job there. And you thought, maybe he's the guy, maybe he could
Right.
transfer down a little bit of a level. He can come in and maybe light up the American and do a little bit more. But, from what I saw throughout the spring, it just does not look like he's the answer. And I hate to say that. That's not really necessarily a knock to him, but I don't think that he has the passing capabilities that EJ had. And
Okay.
I know Temple's trying to shift more to a run-first offense. Stan has been very adamant about that over his 3 years at the head coach, that they just need to find a way to run the football. They need to find a way to support their quarterback and not have, an EJ's type situation where he's throwing 50, 60 passes every week, and getting him hit and putting his neck out there that much. So I think you're going to see a change in that regard, where they're going to try to have a little bit more of a balanced attack. But I don't know if Evan Simon's the guy that can do that. I think from what I saw throughout the spring, I thought Forrest Brock was the more ready of the two. I won't say that he's the guy. I think he still has a lot of room to grow. But he looked like the more accurate passer. He looked a little bit more mobile than Evan did. And I think coming out of the spring, I think he right now is currently sitting in the number 1 QB position. If Temple were to take the field tomorrow against Oklahoma, I think Forrest Brock would be the guy under center for them. But I still think there's a potential that if the right guy comes along in the portal, if they can get him on campus and, maybe they can get some NIL money together, I still think there's a potential that they're going to go out and get a quarterback that's going to compete for the job. I don't think they're just going to go out there to get a guy, though.
So let's switch over to the other side of the ball. I would like to tell you that my memory of Temple is that they stopped the run better than the pass. The reality is I had to look that up because I did not remember. So I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and tell you off the top of my head that I remembered how Temple's defense played, but apparently y'all were better against the run than the pass. And then in your spring game, apparently they gave up a ton of sacks, which, maybe that means you got a good D-line. I don't know. So how are we feeling about the defense?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I wanted to see in year 2 of Everett Withers having taken over the defense from DJ Elliott is that they could get some more pressure, like you said.
Yeah.
They only had 22 sacks all of last season, which was, I think, 92nd in the nation, if I'm remembering correctly. So not great numbers compared to the year prior, where they were getting a little bit more pressure on guys and creating a little more havoc. But like I mentioned, I think just key injuries along the defensive line last year were brutal. They were playing a true freshman. They were playing a walk-on.
Yeah.
Starting them for a good part of the season last year, in the middle and the later parts of the season. So, that was just hard for them. And I think they kind of went out and overstocked the D-line, and they're still in the process of doing that this recruiting cycle, trying to get guys so that way they're not going to be in that situation, I think, again this year. But, I think for as much problems as they've had the last couple years stopping the run, I thought last year they did better than the year prior. Because the year prior, they just got gassed in the run game, and that would just be brutal. When they were going up against teams, they could run it down their throats for
Absolutely.
8-9 minutes at a time. And they were just, that's how they would lose games, because they just couldn't get a stop. But last year, it kind of shifted the pass. The secondary kind of, for lack of better words, kind of crapped the bed in that regard, especially when they were supposed to be a more experienced unit. So Temple went out. They made a change at their safeties coach. I thought the safeties played especially bad last year. They just could not make plays. They were missing tackles. They were letting guys get behind them, and it was ugly at times when teams would try to go deep on them. So I'm feeling a little better as far as what they've went out and got. They got some experienced, proven D1 players from different areas. They brought a guy in, Torrey Richardson from UTEP. So I think he's going to be a guy that's going to start right away. They went out and got a couple FCS corners that I think are going to come in and be kind of plug and play guys to try to buff that secondary and just kind of improve themselves this year in that regard so that they're not getting torched in either area. So hopefully that's the case. I think the biggest question mark right now heading into the season is how do you replace the productivity of a Jordan McGee at linebacker, of a Yavonde Rigby at linebacker, who were two NFL caliber guys who are now both in training camps with the Ravens and Commanders respectively. So, I think that's where the biggest question marks are going to be. And I think, again, they went out and overloaded at linebacker to just try and get guys that are going to be able to just be there, make plays, rotate them in, keep guys fresh in case there are injuries that happen. They're going to be, ready to play and answer the call.
All right, so you said this is going to be Coach Stan Drayton's third year. Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
All right, so I was looking at this, and y'all came up on Adam Rittenberg's list of coaches who might be on the hot seat. He said, and quote, Temple might never be considered a group of five power. The five coaches before Drayton each recorded at least one season of 8 wins or more. 4 of those coaches vaulted into Power 5 jobs. Drayton is now 6-18 with the Owls, having won just 2 of his first 16 American Conference games. Is this guy on the hot seat?
I think, non-conference schedule aside, I think if Temple goes into the conference and they start 0-3 in the conference, I think there's going to be some talk about him being on the hot seat.
Interesting.
I think that they gave him this year as a way to try to you need to win this year.
Yeah.
There are expectations this year. It doesn't matter that EJ's gone now. You need to go out and find a guy that can be your guy, that can fit your system. This is mostly your roster, and I know we were talking about this earlier with the transfer portal. With the way the transfer portal has changed college football, this is his roster now, because it's not like all these guys just transferred. A lot of the guys that were here under the previous regime of Rod Carey, they have left because they were either surpassed by Drayton's guys, or weren't playing, or they just weren't good enough to play at the D1 level.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a make or break year for Stan. As much as I like Stan, I think that he really needs to show a little more this year. And I think he knows it. I think he understands what needs to happen. He's just got to, put the pieces together and make sure they're working together.
I find it amazing that, this guy, that Rittenberg, is saying, Temple was never going to be a G5 powerhouse. I mean, 2016, Temple wins 10 games. They win the American Conference. That was probably the best win of Jeff Monken's career at Army to that point, when we beat you guys to open that season. I mean, that was a good team. Y'all had a bunch of good players, and it's shocking to think of where you were then versus where you are now, and how quickly that sort of switches around. Maybe 2016 doesn't seem that long ago. Of course, I'm 50. That maybe it's just because I'm old, but that I don't know. Can the Owls become a powerhouse? Can Temple be a G5 powerhouse?
I think there's a lot that needs to go into it now. I think the biggest thing is Temple missed the boat in the 2015, 16, 17, 18, those years of Matt Rule and Jeff Collins. I think they sort of missed the boat on becoming that team, because I think if, Jeff Collins maybe stays around another year or two at Temple, I think that obviously they never had go through the Manny Diaz situation where he takes the head coaching job and then leaves 17 days later.
Yeah.
They never end up with Rod Carey as their head coach. And, Rod, and as much as I respect Rod and his ability as a football coach, he was not a great recruiter, and he was not the right fit for Temple. And just his personality and all did not fit at Temple, and it left the cupboard bare for Stan, and Stan inherited a really bad situation. Then to put on top of that, he got the transfer portal. He's got NIL now to do, and Temple's administration was very, very slow to respond with the NIL and get into the NIL game. And that's really hurt, I think, the quality of player that they're able to recruit compared to some of the other members of the conference, like when Houston and UCF were in the conference.
Sure.
And I mean, even now you see East Carolina has a big donors. USF has had tremendous gains in their NIL game. And, I talked to some of the guys who either have covered those teams or still do. And just hearing some of the figures that they're saying are getting thrown around compared to what I know Temple's is getting thrown around. You're comparing gold to peanuts. It's quite outstanding how much of a gap there is in the NIL game right now. So I think that was the thing that they really needed to be more proactive on. I think they needed to ride a little bit more than that Rule Jeff Collins' success. And I really think that they needed to get a stadium when they had the opportunity. That was one of the biggest things of debate when I was at Temple was, are we going to build a stadium? Because, our team's seeing success. And, they presented some plans to the city. The city shot them down, and they kind of gone by the wayside since then. And I don't think you can ever technically be considered a G5 powerhouse or a powerhouse of any regard at the college football level if you don't have those things, cohesively.
Yeah, definitely tough to make your case without your own building.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
And it doesn't help when the Eagles are just keep upping the rent, and they're basically robbing Temple dry because of the amount of money that they're charging Temple to play. And they're not drawing the crowds, obviously, to even balance that out and break even on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, that's the biggest.
You'd probably like to have a stadium that seats like 30,000.
Mm-hmm.
And instead you've got this NFL building that you're trying to fill, and it's just not happening. I can see that. Yeah, man, I've been, it's crazy because like I said, I grew up in Tampa, and, USF was like, I don't want to say it was a little university around the corner, but it was like the local university, and now here we are 30 years later, and it's like, they've seen what UCF did, what Central Florida did. And, they want to build the Death Star 2.0, and they're on the way. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. All right. So last question, at least kind of in the tough ballpark here is Brett McMurphy published American Conference win totals today. He put Temple at 3.5 over at 3.5 over under 3.5 wins.
I think looking at the schedule, I think there is more than 3.5 wins on the schedule.
Yeah.
It's whether all those other factors, come into play. I would like to say that I think that Navy and Army are both winnable games, considering how well Temple did against the triple option last year and against Navy. And they really shut them down for the most part in that game. And that was a little bit of a payback game from the year prior where they lost a heartbreaker in overtime to the Mids. So, I think there's two games. UConn took a big step back last year. That's on their schedule too. I think that's a very winnable game for Temple. The back half of the schedule is much harder than the first half, aside from Oklahoma, in my opinion. Other than that, I think you can hope to find maybe a win against Coastal Carolina, Utah State, Tulsa. I think there are some games there that they have that they can compete in, win in. It's just
Tulsa's another one of those schools that's kind of looking for an identity right now for their football team. Big football area, but in terms of what they're going to hang their hat on, you can't point at this one thing and be like, oh, that's what Tulsa does well. Correct. It's a tough place to start from.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, I think there are possibly 6 wins on this schedule. It's just, I think my biggest question right now is, are they going to have a quarterback that's going to be able to balance out the offense, and can the run game get going?
So what does a good season look like for you? I mean, if the over under is 3.5, you seem like that seems like a reasonable over under to you. So at what point are we like, all right, that's a step in the right direction?
I think what would buy Stan another year is I think they need to at least have 5 wins.
Okay.
A lot of Temple fans will say probably 6, get to a
Well,
bowl game.
Sure.
I think at that point, I don't know if that's realistic given what they have with in terms of the athletic department, what they currently have on the roster. Like I said, obviously things could change over the next couple weeks with some of these older guys or guys still in the portal coming in. I would like to see, obviously I think you need more than 3 wins. You can't finish with 3 wins 3 years in a row or 4 years in a row and expect to, say,
Sure.
yeah, I'm proud of that. And we're on the up and up. I don't think that buys Stan another year. I think you need to probably get to that 5-win mark, maybe have an upset in the conference or at least show that you're going to be competitive and have maybe, some close losses in there. And maybe that buys him another year to try to maybe go out and get a guy that could be the next good Temple quarterback, or at least a guy that could be a little more serviceable than what they have.
Rob, you got any questions?
I was just going to say, and you touched on this already. It looked like there's a lot of moves in the portal defensively, of course. So I think it's shoring up the secondary, which is a smart move. But looking at the schedule, I mean, your schedule is very winnable if the team executes. And I think that's the most difficult part about watching college football is like, hey, look, we have the talent, we have the tools. The schedule is kind of in line for 7 or 8 win season. There's some teams that are like, okay, like North Texas will be a tough one. Oklahoma will be a tough one because those guys are habitually tough with everyone that they play. But, there's some winnable games in there. So it'll be interesting to see how the season falls out. And the only other question that I would have, and we'll touch on this because in historical matchups against Army, Temple has the edge. They're 7-6, but Army has won the 2 most recent ones. So it's kind of like previous history versus current history are kind of button heads against that. And it'll be interesting to see because, for most teams now in the American, it's going to be interesting how they play against the triple option or variations of it, because now you get to see it twice if you have Army and Navy on the schedule in the same year. So advantage to the team that plays both. Like if you get Navy early and then Army later in the year, then that extra week that you're normally practicing, that actually becomes practice for another game, which is one of the difficult pieces that all coaches talk about when they, facing a triple option team is like, hey, I've got to work these options things in because I'm playing these guys in the stretch, but you've got Army and Navy in the first 6 weeks.
Yeah, so, and I thought that was where the schedule at least favored them a little bit, especially with having Navy the week right after Oklahoma. I mean, I don't think anybody in the world in their right mind is expecting Temple to go into Norman and blow up. I think that would be absolute insanity. This is not those Temple teams of 2015 and 16 where, they took Notre Dame to the wire. They beat Penn State. So I think that kind of benefits them, that they can kind of almost get a little bit of a jump on maybe prepping for Navy, throw a little bit of that option stuff in to their scheme, just to, get it started with them, because they know that Navy game is going to be big for them, opening conference play in week 2 of the season, getting that game out of the way early. And then like you said, you have Army a couple weeks later. And you can kind of just, that game, I think, becomes a little bit more winnable right now because of that.
Yeah, I definitely thought one of the reasons that Army attempted to switch the offense last year was that you don't necessarily want to be the second triple option team in the American Conference. Like that's tough. Once every team in the conference starts running CIC periods, that becomes a much harder ask. So I'm, this year, I don't think it's going to be as bad, but I do remember playing teams out of the ACC that had Georgia Tech in conference for a while. And those teams did not struggle with the triple on defense. Like they knew what they were doing. So,
yeah. And I think that's where, Army has a little bit of an edge, though, that they've always been a little bit more of they could throw in the pass game. They have a little bit more looks with the pass that they can throw in, that Temple has struggled with, going back to that 2017 game. And
Kelvin Hopkins in the last minute.
Oh yeah, that was up in Mikey. That was a heartbreaker. I was at that game, and that was just brutal to have to watch. And then the missed field goals by Temple's kicker, and it was just that was such a heartbreaker. But it ended up working out for Temple. They went on to win, I think, 3 out of 4, and then win the bowl game that they went to after that heartbreaking loss. But it was a rough game the last time they played the Black Knights.
Yeah, I just got one last thing, and then I'll pass it back over to Dan for the next read. But composure. I mean, do you think the team is composed after the spring game? Because like that's one of the things that we cannot measure given the transfer portal. Because your team has an identity going into the fall after the season's over. You know, whether you played in December or not. But now that you have all these defensive players transfer in, you've got a new quarterback that transfers in. How does the team look? Have you heard anything from the locker room? How are they looking team-wise? Are they gelling? Because I think that's the most difficult part of the transfer portal is what does the team look like? Because the identity changes from every 6 months now.
Yeah, I think the thing that Stan really preached throughout the spring was, we have to be a family. We have to be a family first, because if you don't go into the season with that mindset that I'm going to play for my brothers, I'm going to lay it out all on the line for them, and we're going to all do that at the same time and do our job together, they're not going to be able to succeed. And he's been very adamant about that throughout his 3 years. I think he knows that because of such turnover they've had the last 2 seasons, that becomes even more vital. And he said, that was one of the things that they were going to really focus on, coming out of spring ball the last couple of weeks of the semester and heading into the summer, was they needed to become more of a family and a brotherhood. So I think that they brought in a lot of guys who are hungry, a lot of guys that have a lot to prove. Like you mentioned, there was a lot of transfers in that came from lower tier schools or, weren't getting playing time at their FBS schools, and they want to show that they can play at the highest level of college football and play well. And I think from the guys that I've talked to, during the recruiting process since, that there is that mindset that they want to prove something this year. They are hungry. They want this. They don't want to see, obviously, their head coach get fired. I think they know that. They love Stan as a coach. I've never heard a player really speak bad of Stan. I think they know what they need to do. It's just like you said earlier, Rob, was a matter of executing, and can we execute come game day when the lights are on?
Awesome. Dano, over to you for the read.
So if you have listened to the As for Football show before, you know that we have a sponsor, and his name is Craig Oxane, Vice President of Residential Lending for New American Funding in Chicago. Friends, Craig is a member of the West Point class of 1994, licensed to lend in all 50 states, but based out of Chicago. He is one of the largest VA lenders in the country. He's going to give you super competitive rates, the best deal he possibly can. And it matters because this mortgage process is super confusing. You got interest rates moving all over the place, trying to get the best deal you can. They put 2 inches of paperwork in front of you to sign. It is just not the time to try to deal with some clown who just wants to make a buck off you, or some mindless website, big box bank, whatever. You want to be able to reach out on the phone and call your mortgage broker and actually have him pick up the phone. And that's what Craig is going to do, right? And this, friends, is how the West Point Network functions. Craig is helping us stay in business here at As for Football, and we are helping you get the best deal on a mortgage that we can by introducing you to the very man that you need to meet. Plus, talked about this before, Craig does not charge lending fees for veterans. That's a huge savings. It's like $1,300, $1,300. If that's not a lot of money, let me tell you, send it to As for Football, because we got bills to pay. Craig Oxane, Vice President of Residential Lending. Check him out. The link's on our website. You just go over there, click the little business card, fill out a form. You'll be talking to Craig in a couple of hours. It is too easy. It's too easy.
Thanks, Dan. All right, so we'll hit the transfer portal real quick. Top 5 in the transfer portal as of today. You've got Ole Miss, Oregon, Texas A&M, Bama, and Texas. Of those 5 teams, they are the statistically best at recruiting people to bring them in. Ole Miss, I kind of like that. Lane Kiffin, I'm kind of a closet fan. I think he's a great offensive coordinator. I don't know how good he is as a head coach. I mean, he can't get those guys over the hump, but we'll see what happens. Oregon, don't really care. Texas A&M, is this going to backfire again? We got to ask that question.
We saw this movie already with Texas A&M. This is every year. They're going to throw out the money out there. That's going to happen.
Yeah, and then how's it going to play out on the field? And then Bama again, that's going to be a restructuring year, so they have to bring some players in because Saban left and changed the face of things. And then Texas, which was kind of an anomaly, just because I think they're set at the quarterback position. I don't think they're looking for anybody else to play QB1 down in Texas, but all the other positions that are kind of out there moving around should be interesting. These teams, like I said, are statistically on the top. But who are you guys watching? Like, have moved in or out on the portal this season that's interests you right now?
So I said this before. So first off, I'm going to be contrarian here, and the team that I'm most interested in right now, because it's a new AAC opponent, is Rice. As we talked about, they're returning 19 of 22 starters. If you're returning 19 of 22 starters, then that tells me that your culture is working and your kids want to be there. That is not a thing that is happening anywhere else really in college football. It's just not. It's even West Point, which has pretty low portal turnover, probably isn't returning, that many kids. I mean, it's not like there's nobody leaving. They went 4-4 in the conference last year with close losses to Tulane and SMU. They only need to really win 2 more conference games to like contend for the championship. I don't know if they'll make it. Like, can they? I don't know, but they should compete to at least be in that discussion, I think. I'm interested. I think as this portal thing goes on, stability matters, and being able to show that people want to be at your school, I think that matters. So this is my test case. And of course, we mentioned EJ Warner going down there, so we'll see how that works out.
How about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I think a team that I'm really looking forward to, and it possibly because there is a Temple connection there, is Syracuse. I think with the hire of Fran Brown as their head coach, I'm really intrigued to see what he's going to do now that he's been given the keys to the castle, and he's going to have the opportunity to run an AAC or an ACC program, because he obviously had been a candidate for Temple's head coaching job the last 2 times it's been open. Temple opted to pass over him, and he comes from the Matt Rule coaching tree. He's a fabulous recruiter, fabulous individual. Really has put a lot of guys in the NFL over the years as a defensive backs coach, and I think with him now having his own program, I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do. I think you've already seen it with some of the recruits he's been able to get for Syracuse, and especially with the way the ACC is. I think it's becoming a little bit more open than, Florida State and Clemson being at the top. So I'd be interested to see what he's going to do. He hired a lot of his buddies from Jersey. So they're kind of dipping down into Temple's recruiting territory. And I'm intrigued to see what him and his new DC, Elijah Robinson, are going to do there at Syracuse.
It is interesting because Syracuse was almost great multiple times in the last 5 years. They start off 5-6 wins in a row and just fall off a cliff. And I don't. I mean, I'm not a Syracuse fan, but I don't root against them because I work with quite a few guys at work that went there, and it'll be interesting to see how they do. So yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and so for me, I'm not looking at a single player, and I'm looking at 2 positions particularly in this, and the quarterback room at Ohio State, because they've got a lot of talent coming in. At first they thought everybody was going to be Ben Howard was going to be the starter from K-State that moved into the position. They thought he was going to be the shoe-in, fill-in after all the turmoil in the offseason there. But sounds like old Jaden Milroe's backup has shown up to practice. I mean, word out of the spring game is Coach Day gave him his helmet stripe at the end of the spring game, which usually doesn't happen until after the first couple weeks of summer camp. Wow. And so there's going to be a pretty significant quarterback battle going on at Ohio State. And then again, we're watching it from last year, but can the Colorado Buffaloes improve their offensive line? I mean, if there was one weakness in that team, it was the fact that Shedeur Sanders couldn't get time. And then now they have to rebuild their entire offense because, their number 1 running back transferred out. So now you have to shore up the offensive line and keep your quarterback protected, and he's got to figure out new weapons on the offense. So it'll be interesting to see how the Buffaloes kind of pan out in the Big 12 schedule. So those are the 2 positions kind of broadly that I'm watching. And of course, the transfer portal is a hot mess. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I know we talked about it earlier and said that, it's not the Wild Wild West. It certainly seems like it. It certainly seems like it. But
Colorado taking on North Dakota State. Did I see that in the first game of the season?
Yeah,
that's like suicide by FCS football. I mean,
Yeah.
that is nuts, man.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a wise decision. I mean, it's good. I mean, North
Good
Dakota
for us.
State though, but think about it. North Dakota State is not going to have to travel that much. You know, it's not really that different change in elevation. It's not like you're coming across the country to play a team, you know, in the near the Mile High City. So it'll be interesting what goes down in Boulder on that first week. But like the first week matchups right now, you got Florida State and Georgia Tech in Ireland. That should be a fun game to watch if you can travel. You got Florida A&M and Norfolk State. That'll be on ABC. Again, as mentioned, North Dakota State and Colorado. Got Temple in Oklahoma. That's going to be an awesome – like, look, Ryan, I know you said, like, it may be crazy. Crazier things have happened. They have gone to overtime with Army. So, I mean, if Temple execute, it's possible. It's possible to have a good game because that's why we play the games, you know.
Exactly.
You got TCU and Stanford. Clemson at Georgia, like that would have been an interesting playoff matchup 4 years ago. You've got Miami, at Florida. I mean, that should be a good game because those interstate rivalries are always good. Got Colorado State at Texas. Hopefully that doesn't turn into a beating. Colorado State has not shown up very well, and their coach needs to save some face ever since the eyeglass discussion that he had about Deion Sanders last year. Western Kentucky at Bama. That should be an interesting test for Bama, just to see what kind of offense they can bring. What kind of offense they can bring to, like, look, if Bama doesn't score 70 points in that game, there's going to be a lot of people asking questions like, what happened? You know, Saban leaves, big shift in the team.
Okay.
You know, you got Indy at Texas A&M. That's going to be the battle of, the battle of NIL money. USC at LSU, and then on September the 2nd, you got Boston College and Florida State. That one's going to be the sleeper, I think, of the first week. Like that game, you should watch it because Boston College tends to be tricky. Florida State is going to have to do some serious rebuilding after last year. Or if they don't come out and make a statement win in that first week, everybody's going to say, see, there's a reason why you guys didn't make the playoff last year. And you don't want to give the college football writers that validation, because if you do, you're never going to hear the end of it for the rest of the season.
All right, Ryan, I got to ask you. So there's the one game on here that I think is significantly more interesting than any of the others. Saturday, August 31st, 7:30 p.m., Notre Dame at Texas A&M. The game strikes me as a mistake for both teams. Who's made the bigger mistake?
You know, I'm intrigued to see what Mike Elko is going to do at A&M.
Okay.
He was a candidate for the Temple job during one of the cycles, and they actually had offered him the position, and he turned it down at the time. And that is why somehow he ended up at Duke then. And, then Temple, poetically enough, gets him in his first game as a head coach at Duke, and Duke wipes the floor with him.
Oof.
So, that was an interesting thing. But I think Mike Elko is he's been a thorn in Temple's side over the years.
Okay.
He was the DC at Wake Forest when Temple played them in the Military Bowl.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, that was coming off the American Championship that year. And they ended up losing that game to Wake Forest, and it was a heartbreaker for them. And that was kind of a disappointer. So I think, Elko at Texas A&M is interesting. Like you said, A&M has an absurd amount of money to just throw around at will, because who knows how long they're going to be paying Jimbo off. But Notre Dame, there's still people questioning, should have they hired Marcus Freeman, and was he the guy to turn the Fighting Irish around? And I think that game's going to really just be, like you said, that's an intriguing shootout, I think, of brewing. I just would like to see who's going to be the one that kind of flubs it up.
Whoever loses that game, they just, set the administrators, the AD's office on fire. Just, you're done.
I think right now I would probably give the edge to A&M, because Notre Dame over the last 10 years, they tend to just not show up to big games. They beat up on the teams they should beat up on, and then they just can't play against anybody else.
Fair.
So I think probably right now I'd give the edge to A&M, but like you said, who knows? You're at least further into the Freeman era at Notre Dame than you are the Elko era at A&M.
Yeah. That's fair.
Friends, do you like Army football but hate social media? I mean, who doesn't, right? Social media is just god awful and getting worse every day. So instead of that, go to asforfootball.com/subscribe and get on our mailing list. We send out one email per week during the season, very sporadic during the off season. That's it. It's too easy. Costs you nothing. Keep up with Army sports and As for Football without going on the Twitters. I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be that way. So that's it. I'll shut up. Rob.
Yeah, Ryan. One last thing. Do you want to plug your handles real quick?
Yeah,
one
please.
more time, so we can get our audience looking at your stuff.
Yep, sure thing. So you can follow me on Twitter at Ryan Wallen 247, which is my display name. You can follow my boss, Sean Pastor, like I said, Temple guru, as far as the records and the record books and just knowing the history of Temple athletics. Post great stuff, has been doing this for 30 some years. You can follow him at Temple Owls Daily, and then you can always find our work on the 24/7 Sports Network, owlsdaily.com.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. Hey, I got a favorite thing. So we're trying to continue this trend of bringing on guests from the AAC. And hey, look, if our fan base asks for it, we will go out and try and find them and bring them on the show. Like we like have these conversations because, again, it's always nice to have somebody that has a lot more insight, because normally we're just watching for big plays. You know, I watch the front seven. Dano watches what he watches. And then it's kind of, we enjoy football as a sport, but we don't have the expertise to kind of deep dive into the teams that we're playing against sometimes. And now that we're in the schedule, like, we would like to have this to be a habitual thing, is to get you on every year, Ryan, to talk about, you know, the lead up and the preview to the schedule, and maybe even before or after the actual contest. But we've got a laundry list on the socials of people that we have marked for interviews. And so if you are out there in the social spaces, shoot Dan or I a note so we can get you on the show. A final note for the Firsty Club. It looks like Facebook has recently discontinued streams from private groups for most third-party platforms, so we're not going to be able to stream this straight into the Firsty Club anymore. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the As for Football YouTube. Sorry to do this to you, but it is beyond our control, because Meta is trying to make money. Hopefully they won't take this video down because of that. But
so before we go on, let me just say real quick, next week, the plan A is Army baseball wins the Patriot League tournament, and then we have Mike Tilton on here to talk about As for Baseball for a week, and then the next week we will do USF in a similar way, because their 24/7 guy reached out to me, and so I put him on. And if it doesn't go that way, you might see USF's football stuff start sooner than that. But let's just beat Navy and stay on the timeline.
Awesome. So for the crew here at As for Football, College Football Roundtable, I'm Rob, the Angry Colonel, calling out of Fayetteville, North Carolina. We got Ryan from the great state of Pennsylvania, and we got Dano Ikebesa calling to you out of coastal Connecticut. And this has been Ring Knocker Radio. Hopefully you guys will check us out next time, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.
Beat Navy.
Beat them.